Hello, everyone. This is Debra Richardson, and today I am putting the AP in Happy, where accounts payable teams are empowered to protect the vendor master file from fraud. This podcast will give a voice to accounts payable team members by talking about the growing reality of cyber attacks in their world and which vendor setup and vendor management techniques they can apply to protect the vendor master file from fraud. Need training? Visit the Vendor Process Training Center to enroll in your choice of weekly live and on-demand training sessions. Plus, get access to vendor setup form templates and reference tools that will help you and your team avoid fraud, fines, and bad vendor data. So sign up for a free account to get access to free training sessions, vendor process FAQs, and a resource library with information you need to manage your vendor master file. Visit training.debrarrichardson.com today. The link will be in the show notes. There is a common scenario for those accounts payable and vendor teams that can do bank account ownership validations when setting up or changing vendor data. And that is, many vendors have legitimate reasons why their bank account holder names do not match their legal name. So the question is how are you supposed to know whether this is legitimate or fraudulent? Keep listening. Welcome to episode 343, Bank Account Ownership Validation Issues. What about vendors with different names? So can I just say, I know plenty of team members that have reached out to me on the accounts payable side or from accounts payable, from the vendor setup and maintenance team, from procurement, whoever has the vendor master file function for adding vendors and changing existing vendors, and asking about bank account ownership validation, as if that's going to be the silver bullet that's going to prevent payment fraud, because now you can check the vendor's legal name, or that the vendor's legal name equals the vendor's bank account holder's name. Also, that the tax ID that was used to set up the account matches the tax ID that you were given when you're setting up the vendor or changing an existing vendor. Also, that the address that's on the bank account matches an address that you have for the vendor. And that's not really a silver bullet at all anymore. I mean, it's an additional validation, and yes, it helps. Just keep in mind, and I don't remember if I put this on a former podcast or not, that a lot of vendors, those three pieces of data are sometimes, depending on the vendors, available online. And so what the fraudsters are doing now is they're just opening, I should say, bank accounts in those names using that same information, sometimes even at the same bank, so as to not arouse suspicion. And so a positive bank account ownership validation doesn't mean what you think it means. You still have to have other authentication techniques, validation resources, internal controls, best practices to make sure that you are not setting up a fraudulent vendor or setting up a vendor with fraudulent information or changing an existing vendor with fraudulent information. Now, all that being said, it does not mean that the bank account ownership validation can't help to identify a vendor that is fraudulent, right? It can be that additional red flag. So I'm not saying you shouldn't do it. I'm just saying you shouldn't rely on it. And now that I see that many vendor teams, again, accounts payable teams, procurement teams, whoever has the function for, adding and updating that information, are starting to get bank account ownership validation access. The not popular, the common scenario that keeps coming up outside of the fact that, not every vendor is found. So the hit rate is, not what they want it to be, is the fact that the bank account names that the vendors are asking you to send the payment to is not the name that is the vendor's legal name. And that could be for a variety of really legitimate reasons. Maybe they are a subsidiary or they are a parent company. And a lot of times in that scenario, the parent companies or the payments will always go to the parent company. I know plenty of people on the AR side, and they are a parent company, and they require their subsidiaries to make payments, or for the payments of the that are due to the subsidiaries, I should say, go to the parent companies, and they're not going to change that. There is also a DBA. I mean, the vendor could have a DBA that is the name on the bank account, and the legal name could be different. Now, that one might be okay, especially because when you collect the W-9, that should include a DBA on it. But not all, right? Vendors will do that, or will submit the W-9 that way, or if it might have been missed. So, because it could have been, right, where the original setup of the vendor was a check payment. And so there was no validation of the, bank account holder name. And then later the bank account details was added because, everybody wants to do an ACH payment, get away from checks. And so when that happens, you don't collect the DBA. The DBA name or the W-9 again that might have the DBA name, which is one reason why, right, when you look at the forms that you use for collecting that information, you need to ask all of that. And so I'll talk at the end about what I really think needs to be done, in addition to some of the recommendations that I'm giving. And I say that because, as you can see with this issue, there is no silver bullet. There's always something. And with this bank account ownership validation, the fact that vendors have legitimate reasons to not have a match to the bank account holder name and the vendor legal name, it's just one of them so far. It keeps coming up. So, any event, they can have subsidiary or be a parent company, and that's the name that's on the bank account. They could be a DBA, and the DBA name is on the bank account. Some banks may display the legal name, some may not. They can also be have had a merger or been acquired. And so the name changes after the, merger might not be reflected yet. So could be, outdated, inconsistent records. And so, and then also it could be like an international entity. And so they might use a U.S. affiliate or agent bank to receive payments. And so you have quite a few, right, legitimate reasons, but your issue is, how do you know if it's legitimate, or how do you know if it's fraudulent? And so I do have a couple of, or a few recommendations of additional steps to take. And then again, I will talk about what I think needs to be taken by everyone. So, just to address the legal name, bank account holder name discrepancy, what I would say, and I've got 5 different recommendations. So, the first one is to definitely make sure that you are checking the request to see if it has any of the flags that might indicate that it's a fraudulent request. And yes, I know you probably already did it, but I think it takes another in-depth review, maybe a second person to see if they see anything that might be wrong with that request. Is it asking something to do something urgently? Are there any spelling mistakes? Are there any context mistakes? Is the tone of the email, if it's supposed to be from your vendor or maybe someone internal and you know them, is the tone different? Now, one of the things I always talk about is how to authenticate the requester to make sure that they are who they say they are. And that is especially true with collecting banking or remittance information. So at the time, right, that if it was a started off as a request as a how do I do that, you're supposed to, ask those identifying questions to make sure that they are who they say they are before you even give them the instructions to do the updates. And then once you get that information in, that those forms, you should have your own forms that you have given them. And so when you get those forms back, there should be authenticating data on those forms in order to make sure that you're getting those from your vendors. So when I talk about what I think really needs to be done, it includes those types of things that have authentication techniques in it, so that hopefully you don't even get that far to do the bank account ownership validation because you have stopped the fraudster with those types of obstacles that you put in the way, so that they don't even get that far. But anyway, check red flags on the request to see if there's something that has been missed, especially any vendors that you consider high risk. All right, so the next thing is number two, and this probably should have been number one, but if you don't already have on your vendor setup form or your banking form that you're having your vendors complete, if you don't already have a field for parent company or subsidiary, add those fields there, and then that can be a resource when you do the bank account ownership validation and it comes back in another name, and now you have the name that it has returned with, maybe on your vendor setup form or your bank account form or whatever form you put it on. That can be something that can be a bit of a validation. Doesn't mean you don't need to do other validations too. But if you've already collected the parent company or the subsidiary name, that's one thing you don't have to go back to the vendor to and ask, right, if they have a parent company or subsidiary, because you've already asked. And now at least you have a name that matches what came back on the bank account ownership results. So that's number two. Number three is to make sure when you are doing the bank account ownership validation that you check for, or the platform that you're using is checking for any bank account activity that has been identified as fraud, or better yet, make sure that it checks bank account activity, which means that it's checking to see, I don't know, one, if the account has just been opened, right? So the fraudster opened up the account. Now they're going to send a bunch of requests out to divert payments to it. Check to make sure that if the bank account, for example, has been getting, I don't know, $2,500 social security checks for, the last 2-3 years, and all of a sudden it's going to get a $2.5 million payment from you or maybe from someone else, that could be an indicator that is a fraudulent request. Check to make sure that maybe, the fraudster didn't get to another one of the vendor's customers before you, and that customer reported it as fraud. So there should be a way to check the activity, the flags on the account, something that is a platform that's doing more than just checking the compare, or I should say, comparing the vendor legal name with bank account holder name, same for the tax ID and same for the address. Make sure it's looking at some type of activity that can be an indicator of fraud. And if you don't know whether your current provider or maybe a provider that or providers that you're looking at to provide that service, whether you don't know whether or not they have it, reach out to them and ask them. All right, so that was number three. And then number four is to require additional steps and confirm the name on the bank account holder name, and the relationship, right, between the vendor and the bank account holder name. So this is where you're really checking, are they really a DBA? Are they really a subsidiary or a parent company? And I have some validation resources. They're free that I could find. There could be more, but I will put those in the show notes. And so the first thing to do that, or an option for you to do that, is to ask for a bank letter. So anyone that has, listened to me talk about business email compromise and other types of fraud, that I know, or that I always say that the bank letters with the vendor banking information on it, that will include the bank account holder's name, but that can be forged. So make sure that you have other supporting documentation that you are collecting to get the vendor's banking information, like your own bank account, vendor bank letter form or vendor bank form that you're collecting vendor banking on. It doesn't mean you can't collect a bank letter or a letter from the bank with the on bank letterhead with the vendor's banking information on it. It just means it can't be the only thing. So make sure you also have your own banking form. But with that, you can ask for a bank letter, and that can be additional validation. But again, because it can be forged, don't let it be the only thing on this list that you collect. The thing that you can do, and I actually like this, but I know it's very manual and not everyone has the ability to do it, and that is to submit a micro entry or a penny test. And when you do that, require a screenshot with that has both the account name captured and the amount sent. And again, I know this is something that not everyone can do. And two, even if you can do it, it is very manual and it does take some time because you have to trigger it. So you have to send it and then you have to wait for the vendor to follow your instructions and send a screenshot that includes, right, the account name and the amount sent. But that, I think, is something that, when combined with other validations, may be a great step to validate that the vendor actually does own the account or have access to the account that they're sending the payments to. The next thing is something that I have not recommended in the past, but this could be something that could be valid, and that is to ask for a letter justifying, right, the relationship between the vendor and the owner of the bank account, that name. And it's just something, it's like a justification letter. And if that was something that I had thought of before, I would probably have some um, template verbiage, which I don't. And this might be something that I might add for those of you that are on the vendor process training pass, right? That has, 56 different training sessions and that has forms and vendor communication templates, right, set for you. I may add this as an additional vendor communication template, and that's that justification letter when the vendor legal name and the bank account holder name are different. So stay tuned for that. But for now, if you want to add that, it's certainly something that again, can be forged. This is why you don't just ask for that, but when combined with other validations, uh, can help to prevent fraud. And plus, if you have right fraudsters that are trying to divert vendor payments, the more you ask for, the more they're just going to go away and look for other potential victims that's not asking for these types of things. So it can help in that situation as well. All right. And then additional steps also include validations. And so if you have, a vendor has a DBA or a parent subsidiary relationship, there are some places you can go to check it. So I did a quick search on DBA on D&B Dun& Bradstreet. And so I went to their business directory, and all I did, what company did I use? I used General Electric, or GE. And so I entered that name into the business directory search, and then it came up with some results, but it would let me refine my search to only include like subsidiaries in the results. And it did that. And so it showed some subsidiaries. So you can check it that way. There's another site called Open Corporates, and I've talked about them before. I even put them on my vendor validation reference list uh, that reference list with 28 different validation resources. At least I think I did. That is always in the show notes that you can download for free. But anyway, Open Corporates, you can go on there and enter the company name, and then the parent subsidiary may be listed in the results. So it's just one more place you can go, and it's free, just like it is with D&B, at least for the original search. So one more place you can go is Open Corporates. The next one, and I've talked about them before, but it's the Securities Exchange Commission, or SEC, their EDGAR database, where for public companies, you can look for filings and forms, right? Documents that may contain subsidiary parent information. 10Ks is one of them, but it could be other forms as well. And again, that is for public companies only. And then lastly, I have state registration sites. So you can go to the Secretary of State or business entity search, right, and search for that business in the state in which they are registered, and see if they, registered a DBA or some additional legal names, right, or some additional names that you can check against. Now, I will say that the state registration is also free, and I do have a resource library on the Vendor Process Training Center. You just have to sign up for a free account, and I have a link to all of the states, and it's really state sites for the Secretary of State and the business entity for all states. And I have it for tax reporting research, but you can use it for anything, especially this scenario. So I will again put a link to all of these in the show notes, and you can take a look and see which one might serve your purpose. So that was number 4. And then the last one I have, number 5, is if you have to pay that vendor, but you are not sure of, paying them to this bank account that where the bank account holder's name does not match the vendor's legal name, and maybe it's a change, right? And so you might want to just pay that vendor by check versus paying them by ACH, and risk making, right, that change and making a fraudulent payment, or not changing it at all because it might be fraudulent, and then sending that payment to an account that's been closed. And now the vendor's not going to get paid, and you're going to get that payment back that now you have to rework because it's a returned ACH payment. So you might want to consider paying them by check. All right, so those are the five, and I may say these out of order, but these are the five that I recommend. So, first of all, make sure that you are collecting the vendor banking data on your own forms. Make sure they include authenticating data. Make sure it includes like a field for parent company or subsidiary, so that if the bank account ownership validation does return a different name in the results, maybe now you have something that will compare it to and match and be less of a red flag for fraud. Number two is to require additional approvals for the setup, right? Especially if you have high risk vendors, especially if the request includes, verbiage like urgency. Bringing in those additional eyes on the request may find, right, those red flags that may have been missed. Also, number three is to check for any red flags on the bank account. Make sure that when you're doing the bank account ownership validation, that the service or platform that you're using also looks at activity on the account that could mean or that could show that the account is a fraudulent account. And then number four is to require additional steps to confirm the name on the bank account, the relationship between the vendor and the bank account holder name. That can be things like a bank letter, a micro entry, penny test. It could be a justification letter. It could be doing additional validations or multiple of those. And then the last one is if it is a vendor change or, adding a vendor bank account to an existing vendor that has a check payment, just keep paying them by check or just change or switch to paying them by check until you can confirm the bank account that's being added or changed on the vendor record. Now, with that, I will say, and I alluded to it before, is that I think the best way or the best process when you are setting up a vendor, changing vendor information for, right, an existing vendor, is to make sure that you have incorporated up to 5 authentication techniques, 29 internal controls, 17 best practices, and 18 vendor validations that are part of the authentication validation management framework, so that in your vendor setup and maintenance process, you have eliminated those gaps that could prevent fraud and hopefully will deter those fraudsters before you even get to the point of doing the bank account ownership validation. Stop them, right, when they're making their requests, when they send those documents in. Make sure those forms, those documents, they have built-in fraud prevention. And so if you don't know like what all of that is, I will put a link in the show notes. It's probably already there, but it's for the Vendor Process Training Center, where I talk about that 3-step vendor setup and maintenance process to avoid fraud, fines, and bad vendor data. And that is authentication validation management. So if you want to know more about that, I'm actually also going to put a link in the show notes for a 3-minute video that explains it on my YouTube channel. All right, guys. So that is it for today. I didn't know I didn't mean to go this long, but I think this is a topic that will continue to evolve. And so I may have a training for this in the future and maybe capturing some other common scenarios that occur now with that bank account ownership validation. All right, everyone. So thanks. I hope you enjoyed the 343rd episode of the Putting the AP in Happy podcast, where accounts payable teams are empowered to protect the vendor master file from fraud. Don't forget to check the show notes for the links mentioned in the podcast. And if you enjoyed this episode, consider subscribing and writing a review of my podcast on the platform that you use to listen. Stay happy.